Well, grace and peace to you all this morning. I think it's interesting that I have placed the music stand, my lectern, as it will, dead center in the room today, and you have all migrated to the edges. Make sure I don't back into anything. I rearranged stuff a little bit today, so I'm feeling a little out of place. But it's all good. It's all good. Hopefully you have your Bibles with you and ready to open up. That's kind of a practice of our faith, is to bring our Bibles to, at least to church and Bible study, so we can look things up. I heard it once said that people will do almost anything for their religion. They will argue, they will write, they will even fight for it. They will do almost anything except live for it. There's a guy named William Barclay who was a popular preacher a few decades back. He wrote a commentary on the Gospel of Luke, and he wrote this. He said, "It's possible to be a follower of Jesus without being a disciple. To be a camp follower without being a soldier of the king. To be a hanger-on in some great work without pulling one's weight." And then he went on to say, once someone was talking to a great scholar about a young man. And he said, "So-and-so tells me he was one of your students." And the teacher said, "Well, he may have attended my lectures, but he was not one of my students." There's a whole world of difference in between attending lectures and being a student, right? And Barclay concluded by saying, one of the supreme handicaps of the church is that in the church there are so many distant followers of Jesus and so few real disciples. Now, I think Jesus would probably agree with that, based on the passage that we're going to examine today, which is in Luke chapter 14. And we're going to look at verses 25 to 35. So please feel free to look that up. Now, from what Jesus says in this passage, I think he wants us all to understand that the demands of discipleship are decidedly difficult. Thankfully, you're all seated in comfortable chairs, because what he has to say is likely to make you uncomfortable. It certainly made me feel that way. Now, Jesus is about to explain that there are hard realities involved in following him. And there's a tendency among some to downplay his teaching, especially in this passage, by turning it into some kind of a metaphor, or saying that it's just hyperbole that he said this, even though there's absolutely nothing about what he says or the context in which he says it to suggest either of those things is true. To put it bluntly, Jesus is going to tell everyone that they are not his disciples if they don't hate their families and themselves. I saw every face go, huh? Well, listen for yourself. Luke chapter 14. We're going to start right at verse 25. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." All right, so let's be clear on the context. Context always matters. He is talking to the crowd. And when you read Luke's gospel, every time Jesus is talking to a crowd, every time Luke refers to a crowd, he's talking to the whosoever, the everyone who might be there. That means it includes everybody. Are we part of everybody? Yes, we are. Look, I even put it up on the screen in case you missed it. Yes, this means you and me. All of us. The things Jesus is saying here, he is saying to us, just as if he was speaking to the people back in his time. It's to everyone. Just as if he's saying it to you directly. Which brings us to the word hate, right? Because it can't possibly mean what it sounds like. Why would anyone ever say we should hate our closest relatives and even our own lives? Well, as I do then in situations like this, I delved into the original languages, I pried into the Greek and the earliest manuscripts, And I found that this word here is this word, mizeo. Everyone say, mizeo.
Mizeo.
There you go. You're going to remember that for all about 3 seconds, I know. Mizeo is best translated into English as to hate, detest, or abhor. Doesn't really seem like that's helping much, does it? Is this the same teacher who told us we're supposed to love our enemies and do good to them? And told us to begin, now start plotting against your family members? Is that the idea here? Well, no, that's not actually what's happening here. What we're seeing is a difficulty of translation. In this case, we've got a Greek translation of a Semitic idiom. Y'all know what an idiom is, right? No, not the guy standing at the front of the room. It's an idiot. It's a whole different. Yeah. An idiom is a saying that means something to the culture and language who uses it, but not necessarily to other cultures and languages. Like if you're joking around with someone, they might say you're pulling their leg, right? You've all heard that, right? Ah, they're pulling my leg. You've probably said it. In our culture, this is something we all understand. If you're somewhere else in the world, though, and you say you're pulling someone's leg, they're going to wonder what the heck you're doing. Different cultures all have their own kind of sayings just like this. In Russia, instead of saying they're pulling a leg, you'd say you're hanging spaghetti noodles from their ears. Which is a great, there's some great illustrations for this, by the way. I just picked my favorite. We might say that we need to sleep on something. If you were in Iceland, you would say you need to put your head in the water. There's this Jewish idiom being used in the scripture here. It's being forced into Greek and then translated to English. It's a word that means to love less or to turn away from or detach from. It doesn't mean you actually hate your mother. It just means you choose to love Jesus more. But if you were forced to choose between the two, you would go with God over mom. Sorry, mom. It's not the absolute love, hate that it might sound like to our ears, though, right? In Genesis chapter 29, there's this biblical love triangle. Jacob was married to these sisters, Leah and Rachel. And in verse 30 in Genesis 29, we hear that Jacob loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. And then in verse 31, we hear that God saw that Leah was hated. And it uses the same Hebrew word that is being translated into this word hate in Greek here. And it just means she was loved less. It didn't mean that Jacob didn't still care about her or the children that he had with her or their family relationship or any of that. It just meant that he liked Rachel more, gave her more preference than he did Leah. She was loved less. In verse 33, Leah's pregnant a second time. She says it's because the Lord heard that she is hated. She's loved less, turned away from, she's been detached from. And so God is blessing her to make up for her second status. In Matthew's version of this story that we're looking at in Luke, he quotes Jesus slightly differently to make sure that we can understand that Jesus isn't really telling you to hate your family. Matthew translates it this way. He says, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me, this is Jesus speaking, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Same thing, different words, right? But no matter how carefully we parse the wording on this, it still sounds like a horrible thing to say, doesn't it? Especially when you consider the culture in which this was being said. Family was everything to the people in this day and time. Everything. It wasn't just important. It was everything. But Jesus is trying to convey to the crowds around him that you may find yourself at some point faced with a decision where you can either choose to follow your Christian ethics, as we would refer to it now, or you could choose to follow through on some family responsibility or commitment instead. well, my family says that so-and-so was responsible for the loss of our financial standing in this world, so I have to go kill someone from their family. Well, Jesus says, love your enemy. Well, how am I supposed to love that person if my family says this? Which one are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the way that Jesus says, or are you going to choose the way your family says? These are circumstances that we run into. If you're going to choose against Jesus, why are you pretending to follow him now? I know that sounds harsh too, doesn't it? But that's what it's saying. Either you're going to choose that you're going to love and do what Jesus says, or you're going to love and do what someone on the other end of the world says, the other spectrum says. Jesus said, take up your cross. That meant something a lot deeper back then. Nowadays we're like, oh yeah, because like Jesus dragged a cross and then someone carried it for him, and then so we're going to take up a cross. And we put wheels on a cross and we pull it around. I looked for crosses for a demonstration. You'd be surprised, crosses with wheels, they're actually very affordable. $37.95. I could have it here from Amazon in 48 hours. Because we wouldn't want dragging it across to be inconvenient for us. There are some of you who are thinking of a news story from a few months ago where there was someone on a big stage dragging across with wheels. That's not even when I was looking for this, it was before then. Crosses with wheels have been a thing for about 20 years now. Got to make it easy. But back then, crucifixion was how Rome killed rebellious slaves and revolutionaries. Not just one or two at a time, usually it was whole groups of them, whole families of people. Because again, families were everything. In fact, crucifixion was so horrific, most people wouldn't even talk about it except in euphemisms. They would talk about, oh, the ultimate punishment is being meted out. Or, oh, the slave's death has been given to so-and-so. And if you really, really were angry with someone, you might say to them, hey, take up your most awful cross. That's like saying, go to hell, but not in a nice way. Lower class, I'm sure the upper classes did this too, but I only have records from lower classes. Lower classes around Rome would insult each other by calling them crossbait. You're crossbait. So when Luke's audience hears Jesus told them that they should carry their cross, they're not hearing some metaphor about, oh, I'm going to have to face a difficult time here or there. They're hearing that following Jesus means they need to expect they're going to be humiliated and made to suffer and die by the world. In fact, it was said that once you lifted your crossbeam, once you took up your cross, you were already dead. So Jesus telling you to carry a cross is like saying, just everything else in the world is dead except following me. He wanted them to know that the demands of discipleship are decidedly difficult. He's not trying to prevent anyone from following him. He's just trying to make sure that they're going to count the cost and then be willing to pay it when it comes up. Well, why would we want to do that? Why would we accept any kind of discipleship that would put us at odds with the world at large and maybe even at odds with the people that we love the most? Well, maybe counting the cost involves more than just earthly consequences. To give a fuller picture of his meaning, Jesus shared a parable. I know you're all like, oh, this was a parables thing, and then we're talking about discipleship. Yeah, no, we're still on parables. In fact, we're going to hear a couple of parables today, because Jesus told two stories to try to illustrate this point, because he was afraid people were going to miss the first one. I know usually he's excited that people are going to miss his thing and have to think about it. Now he's going to give you two stories that you're going to miss the point of. Isn't that great? He's trying to help out. Look at verse 28. It says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Ha-ha. An unfinished tower is a useless thing. It's not good for anything else except drawing ridicule, actually. And in the honor and shame economy of the first century, building things was considered honorable, and completed projects added to the distinction of the person who had led for them to be completed. But unfinished projects, they drew shame. The longer they stood unfinished, the more shame accrued to you and your family. And if you abandon a project totally incomplete, that was humiliating. So if this is like a life of following Jesus, what does that say? Well, it says that if you're going to set out on your faith journey and then give up, you're going to be ridiculed. And you probably deserve it. I feel so mean today, quoting Jesus like this. There's a 2nd century book called The Martyrdom of Polycarp. It includes this story of a man named Quintus. Quintus turned himself in to demonstrate his faith in Jesus. He talked a whole bunch of people from his congregation into going with him, and they all turned themselves in at the proconsul together. Christianity was illegal at the time, and those who were arrested often were beaten or sometimes even given to beasts in the arena if they didn't recant their faith. Now, Polycarp, actual photograph of Polycarp. It's amazing what you can find on the internet. He was an 86-year-old bishop of Smyrna when he was martyred after he refused to offer sacrifices to the Roman emperors. And the Roman emperors, a number of them were considered to be gods. And so in Roman cities, you had to worship the emperors. Polycarp was burned at the stake. And as he burned, they speared him. So a story rose up that the flames had refused to touch him because he was defiantly worshiping Jesus. And so the flames didn't touch him, so they had to stick spears in him. Probably he just was burning too slowly for them, frankly. Now Quintus, fueled, I guess, by stories of heroic martyrs, he took his group of believers to the proconsul and they turned themselves in. But while he was there, he received some fairly graphic descriptions of what was going to happen to him, combined with the seeing some of the fierce animals waiting for them in the arena. And Quintus was very quickly convinced to renounce Jesus, swear that Caesar was Lord, and offer a sacrifice to the emperors. And you might be thinking, well, that's just that. They were going to kill him. He needed to do that, right? Well, did his recanting bring those around him to praise his courage or to ridicule his failure? Which do you think happened? Well, it's hard to know for sure, but his story is shared in that book about Polycarp as a warning about unpraiseworthy behavior. So it's unlikely that changing his mind won him any honor from either side. The Romans still killed him. The Christians use him as an example of bad faith. Failing to honor his commitment in the face of great difficulty might have had greater repercussions than that as well, than just what happened to him in that point. Look at something else Jesus said. This is from Luke chapter 12, verses 8 and 9. Assuming my screen is keeping up with me. I tell you, whoever publicly acknowledges me before the others, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of God. But whoever disowns me before others will be disowned before the angels of God. This should weigh a lot more heavily on you. Ridicule and hardship because you decided to follow the way of Jesus, or the cost of Jesus denying you in heaven. Which one of these is a heavier weight to bear, do you think, when you stand before a throne on Judgment Day? And that's already a lot. I mean, this is a lot. We could stop right here and be, wow, that is a heavy message. Oh, but Jesus wasn't done. Remember, I said there were two stories. Two stories. Go back to Luke 14, verse 31. Jesus says, or suppose there's a king about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he's able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he's not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and ask for terms of peace. I'm going to war. You're going to kill me. maybe I should think about this. How could we get along? Wouldn't that be great? Imagine you're the king. The other king has this massively superior force. That means almost certain defeat when it comes down to a battle between you and them. It's going to take committing every resource you have to fight. And if any of your people survive, you know they're going to be sold as slaves, and your whole kingdom, everything you've ever built, is going to be destroyed. Maybe you should say, what are the terms for peace here? Except that's likely to mean you have to pay tribute. And then even if you are allowed to keep your kingdom, you'll have to swear loyalty to the other king. What does that mean for us? Well, if I'm the king in this parable, who is the other king? Who's the king that can't be beat? Who's the king that I'm worried about? Who does that represent? Does that king represent the world and ridicule? No, because we have the resources available to defeat the world if we choose to draw on them and commit ourselves to victory. Because Jesus is giving this as an example for people who are choosing to follow him to remember. So the king that we can't defeat must be God. The world must be defeatable. What do I do if I'm faced off against God? Well, I better find out what the terms for peace with God are. To have peace, according to what I've been told so far, let's see. I need to take up my cross and put Jesus ahead of even the members of my own family. I need to be a disciple who's sworn my fealty to the King of Kings. I think I'm okay with that. But let's see what Jesus told his followers. In John chapter 14, verses 15 and 16, Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commands. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to help you and be with you forever. Oh, so if I count the cost, and I become a disciple, and I keep the commands of Jesus, what are the commands of Jesus? Anyone remember?
Love one another.
Love, yeah. He started with love one another, and then love your enemies, and then he got on to the point where he's just like, just love. I can't get you guys to get all these other pieces together. Just remember, just love. That's all you need to remember. That comes right before this thing in John 14, by the way. This is a new command I have for you. Love one another. So, I'm sorry, I become a disciple. I need to keep the commands of Jesus. The cost could be the separation from family, earthly suffering, and maybe death. But you know what? Compared to a heavenly cost, that's totally payable. Not comfortable, not great. There's better situations that you could be in, but just worst case scenario, that could be the cost. But if there is earthly trouble, even death, we don't face any of it alone because we're told we'll have this advocate. An advocate, in Greek the word is parakletos. I love this word, it's very easy to remember. If you had a pair of clay toes, you would have pair of clay toes. No one? Not even my son. He's just back there shaking his head. Yeah, well, that's right. Parakletos, it's a Greek word that means advocate, counselor, and comforter, all in one. A disciple might face earthly trouble, but you'll have heavenly comfort and counsel at all times. And we need to remember that the demands of discipleship are decidedly difficult. But once we count the cost, we should realize that the rewards far exceed any expenditure, even if we give up every earthly thing we have ever known or owned. Which I mention because that is exactly what Jesus asks us to do. Go back to Luke 14, look at verse 33. Jesus says, in the same way, those of you who do not give up everything, you cannot be my disciples. Those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. I skipped a word. Don't want to do that when you're reading scripture. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Martin Luther, the reformer, he once said there are 3 conversions necessary to a faithful life, the conversion of the heart, the mind, and the purse. Richard Foster said that of the three, we moderns find that last one to be the most difficult. This instruction, by the way, to give up everything, that shouldn't surprise us. We've heard it from Jesus before, in fact, several times. In Luke chapter 6, he said we should give to everyone who asks, and that if someone takes our stuff, we shouldn't ask for it back. In Luke 12, verse 33, he says we should sell all of our possessions and give them to the poor. And earlier in the chapter we're looking at, he told the Pharisees that they should only invite the poor and disabled to their tables and not look to get anything in return from who they invite into their world, right? That means that this passage we're reading, it is at least the fourth time that Jesus has said we need to detach from our stuff. It's like he means it or something. But that's crazy. Because we got to keep our stuff, right? That's where we draw our status from. If we can't show people that we have a lot of stuff, how do they know we're important? Look at the stuff that I have. It's so cool. Therefore, I am also. Our wealth is our security. And then there are the things that we hold on to because we're certain that there are memories that we've attached to them. And those memories, those things are more important than the people things, because I've got this stuff and I remember it because I've kept this Coke bottle from 1978 and I remember the person who gave it to me, and so that Coke bottle is obviously the memory. If I lost that, I would forget completely about the person, and it doesn't matter if that Coke bottle is in the way of me getting into any new relationships because I have a Coke bottle. Why do you all look like you connect with that illustration? Do you all have Coke bottles at home? Maybe we're afraid that if we don't have that widget or old napkin somewhere, we won't be useful anymore. We got to have this thing. Tam asked me yesterday if I had this little metal ring. She found this little ring clippy thing on the ground, like a little key ring thing. And she's like, do you have a way to clean this one up? Because it's all rusty. And I'm like, no, but I used to have a whole box full of those because I kept everything. But when you move every 3 years, you stop doing that because you get tired of carrying it around. So I got rid of it on this last move. I don't have that box of stuff anymore. So I didn't have it. But you know what? She didn't decide that I was useless and reject me, even though I didn't have that widget. She's smiling at me right now. Our stuff is an anchor that holds us fast to one spot, no matter who or what calls us to move on. No, God, I'm afraid I have to stay here. It's too much work to pack and move all my stuff. I'm sure you won't mind if I just ignore your instruction in these 2 or 3 little areas of my life, and that's not going to make my discipleship worthless, is it? You don't really mean I have to give everything to you, do you? But Jesus actually says that's exactly what he means. Go back to Luke 14. Verses 34 and 35, Jesus says, salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how could it be made salty again? It's fit neither for the soil nor the manure pile. It is thrown out. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. How often does salt lose its saltiness? I've got this one box of salt that I bought that I've been trying to use up for like 3 years. It still tastes like salt. It's doing its job. I will tell you, though, that's modern salt. It's purified. It's a lot more stable than salt used to be. Back in Jesus' day, they didn't really know how to completely purify salt. So what they generally ended up with was a bowl or a small pool of salty water, kind of like ocean water or water from the Dead Sea or something like that, or a salt well. They had salt wells that they would dig just because they had salty, brackish water in there, and you pull it up and you let it dry out, and then what you ended up with was not just, there's like a whole mixed bag of things, really. The 2 main things being sodium chloride, which is the actual salt, and that was mostly mixed in with calcium chloride, and that was all right because the two together it still tastes like salt if it's just the two kind of things together. But as they interact, excuse me, I was just thinking about tasting salt and my throat got really dry. As sodium chloride and calcium chloride interact, they combine and they make I had a couple of times I tried to explain the chemical process of this and I realized that it's boring. So let me just say, you combine them together, you end up with carbon dioxide, and then the carbon dioxide, as it leaches out, it takes the sodium away with it, and you're left with nothing but calcium carbonate. Moisture gets absorbed in, think salt, sucks up moisture, right? So moisture gets in, and then as the moisture evaporates, it takes away the sodium, and it leaves you with calcium chloride, a whole lot of calcium chloride in some cases, or what we these days, in more modern terms, would call chalk. And it wasn't any better as a food seasoning back then than it is now. If you don't believe me, after church we'll go, and even if you dip it in chocolate, those sticks of chalk, not good. Not good. You would not even use it as fertilizer. It was just worthless, totally worthless. And you may not realize that salt used to get used as fertilizer. In fact, it's one of the most effective natural fertilizers that there is. You can use it by itself, but you know what makes it better? If you mix it up with manure in just the right proportions. So a big salted pile of manure. I talk about manure a lot. I'm not sure why that is. I guess inside of me there's like a 7-year-old boy that's stuck here, just can't get off of it. Properly salted manure makes this potent muck that helps grow some really exceptional crops, which is the point of being a disciple, a follower of Jesus. You're supposed to be out growing the world. Your fruit is supposed to spread and grow and bring a harvest, right? Now, over the last couple of centuries or so, since we stopped using salt as fertilizer, pastors trying to understand why Jesus would compare us to salt have mistakenly preached that it's because he wants us to go and preserve the world. That's kind of something that salt can do. If you pack salt around meat, it slows the decaying process so that it rots less quickly. And that's been pretty common use in recent centuries. So, pastors looking for examples. They're like, aha, Jesus wants us to be salt so that we can be a preservative. But that's actually the opposite of what Jesus is teaching. He's not saying, disciples, I want you to go out into the world and help it to spoil more slowly than it was spoiling before. He wants you instead to mix in with the crap and encourage the world to produce better, healthier crops. More fruit, right? God's plan for the world is not now, nor has it ever been, to just kind of let it rot around us, whether it's quickly or slowly. Instead, God's plan is for us to help restore the world to health and vitality. But to do that, you need to give up everything. It's all pieces of rotten fruit. If you put a rotten banana next to a bunch of good bananas, how quickly do they go bad? Yeah, really fast. So love your family, but lead them in the way of Jesus instead of letting them pull you away from it. And you can't give up being salty for an hour or two while you go off and do something else, because then you become just chalk mixed into manure instead of fertilizer. Enjoy your life, but remember who gave it to you and trust God's promise that earthly life is really just the seed of this wonderful garden that comes from trusting Jesus. We live in the wealthiest time and country in history, but we need to recognize the stuff that we collect is meaningless in the big picture. And I've got some cool stuff. Honest. But we have to use our treasures to cultivate the world around us. The poor, the oppressed, the lost, they can all experience new growth. They can become plants reaching for the sun's light in their lives. They can leave behind poverty, oppression, and separation. It's not easy. The demands of discipleship are decidedly difficult. So is that phrase. I have now said it 4 times. The demands of discipleship are decidedly difficult. Don't pursue following Jesus without taking time to count the cost first. But once you have examined the cost of following Jesus versus the cost of failing to follow Jesus, then get in line behind him and follow him to the end of time. Because it's the only valuable thing that you can do with your life. And I know that's a lot. And somehow I feel like I've said too much, and at the same time I feel like I haven't said quite enough. Jesus said to the crowds, which means he said to you and me, that to be a true disciple meant putting everything else second. The way of Jesus needs to be first in all things. We've got to put him first so strongly that it might seem at times that we hate everyone else by comparison. Maybe even mom. And I love my mom. We must give up everything. What we have is not meant to be a security blanket. It's not meant to be an anchor. Trusting God means we have to let go and follow where Jesus leads. Using what we have to bring ourselves and others closer to him along the way, rather than hoarding them and holding on to them. It's not an easy task that Jesus laid out. The demands of discipleship are decidedly difficult. Some people will do almost anything for Jesus. They'll argue, write, and even fight for him. Almost anything except live for him. Because that costs too much. So count the cost. Understand that success may be expensive in worldly terms, but that failure costs you everything in cosmic terms. Count the cost and pay it. How can you do this? Well, you can start by asking God to lead you. Our places of prayer are always open, but wherever you are, you don't need to wait for me to finish or for the room to clear or to come up and put creaking knees to the floor. You could just pray. And remember, there's no shame at the altar, whether it's this one or God's altar in heaven. There's only mercy and forgiveness from the Creator, who knows you and loves you. So claim his grace for your life, and then strive to live that gift out to the world. You won't do so alone. Even if every single person you ever knew abandoned you in your walk with Jesus, God will always remain with you in the form of the advocate, the Spirit, who will be with you to comfort and guide you in all things. Pray with me. God, help us to hate everyone else in this room, but not that way. Help us to remember to love and cherish the way of Jesus, the gift that you have given us of life, and the treasure that we can grow in the world around us rather than keeping for ourselves. Help us to be the beacons of light, the salted manure to this world, the fruit that grows more fruit. Help us to be all those good things that you want us to be. And help us to encourage those around us to come along so that they also love Jesus and hate us in that way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.